My name is Isabella Graves, and for years, I lived as the shadow in my own family's story. They laughed without me, celebrated without me, and reminded me at every turn that I was never enough to be one of them. Still, I held on to hope that one day they might see me differently. That hope shattered the moment wedding invitations were sent to everyone but me. The silence wasn't an accident, it was a message. What they didn't know was that while they pushed me away, I was building something they could never imagine. So when the day of the wedding arrived and they thought they had erased me from their lives, I didn't just show up uninvited. I walked in as the owner of the very place they thought belonged only to them. Chapter 1 begins with Isabella Graves recounting the summer afternoon when the truth of her exclusion unfolded in the simplest, cruelest way, through an empty mailbox. She remembers standing by the door, hearing the envelope slide across the floor, her heart leaping with the naive hope of finding her name written in gold. Instead, her fingers sifted through electricity bills, store coupons, and distant relatives' letters, but never the one that mattered. To her, each absent envelope was not just paper, it was proof she had been forgotten, or worse, deliberately erased. As she speaks, the screen lingers on photographs of her childhood, where her presence is a faint shadow on the edge of family portraits, never the center, always pushed aside. She recalls how silence from her parents and siblings hurt more than scolding ever could, and in that silence, she felt invisible. Isabella describes how she watched the world prepare for her sister's wedding through whispers, rumors, and even a newspaper announcement, but not a single word addressed to her. She tells of staring at the mailbox every day as though it might apologize, as though an invitation could still appear and undo the humiliation. The narration grows heavier, her voice lowering with controlled anger, until the final line lands with cold precision. They thought she did not belong at the wedding, but the truth waiting ahead was darker and sharper. What they did not know was that the wedding they were celebrating so proudly was already under her name, her ownership. And with that revelation, the story tilts, promising not just pain, but revenge dressed in elegance and power. Chapter 2 turns back the clock, pulling the audience into Isabella Graves' childhood, where the roots of her exclusion were first planted. She recalls how she grew up in a house full of noise, but the sound rarely included her. Birthdays became moments of quiet shame, her cakes smaller, her gifts cheaper, her presence often overlooked as her sister basked in attention. She speaks of family dinners where laughter filled the table, but her words were brushed aside like unimportant whispers. Teachers at school praised her achievements, yet at home, those victories were dismissed as accidents or luck, never enough to earn her parents' pride. The visuals paint her memories vividly: an empty seat left at a recital, a photograph of her sister front and center, while Isabella is pushed to the far edge, half cropped out of the frame. As the chapter unfolds, Isabella shares the sting of subtle humiliations, the hand-me-down dresses, the chores piled onto her shoulders while others were free to play, the way her parents introduced her as the quiet one, when in truth they had silenced her long before she had the chance to speak. She remembers the loneliness of being present in body, but absent in belonging, like a ghost haunting her own home. Yet within those shadows, a spark was forming. Her voice trembles with both pain and defiance as she reflects on how invisibility gave her sharp eyes. She learned to study people, to read between their words, and to carry secrets quietly until the right moment. The chapter ends with a shift in her tone. She admits that while she was made to feel worthless, every dismissal carved into her a determination to one day prove her family wrong. The screen fades to black as her words echo. They raised me to believe I was invisible. What they didn't realize was that shadows can grow teeth. Writing. Chapter 3 shifts into the storm of Isabella Graves' teenage years, when the years of small cuts finally bled into one unforgettable wound. She recalls a winter evening when she returned home late from school, her arms heavy with books she had borrowed for an essay she hoped might make her parents proud. Instead of praise, she found the front door locked, the lights inside warm but unreachable, her family's laughter muffled behind glass. She knocked, called, begged, but no one opened the door. The cold that night was more than weather. It was a truth, a declaration that she was never meant to be part of their world. That was the night, she admits, when the final thread tying her to them snapped. Her narration sharpens as she describes how the humiliation hardened into a vow. No tears, no pleading, just silence as she walked away from the house that had never felt like home. She worked jobs most teenagers wouldn't touch, cleaned after strangers, stacked shelves until her fingers cracked. Every dollar saved not just for survival, but as a weapon forged quietly for the future. The visuals become darker and grittier. Isabella sweeping the floor of a grocery store at midnight, a blurred shot of her staring out a bus window with the city lights reflecting in her eyes, her figure dwarfed by towering buildings that seemed to mock her smallness. She reflects on how, for the first time, the idea of escape felt not like a dream, but a necessity. Every slight, every insult became fuel. The loneliness that had once swallowed her whole began to turn into something sharper, more focused. The chapter closes with Isabella's voice low and steady, a promise etched in ice. I left with nothing, but nothing was lighter to carry than their cruelty. And with empty hands, I began building the life they swore I could never have. Writing. Chapter 4 marks the beginning of Isabella Graves' transformation from a forgotten daughter into an architect of her own destiny. She recalls how leaving home with nothing but bitterness and a thin wallet forced her to make choices most people never imagined. She took jobs that paid pennies but taught her survival, waiting tables in the early morning, cleaning offices at night, and studying business textbooks in between shifts. The exhaustion was crushing, but she learned to wear it like armor. Each sleepless night was not just sacrifice, it was strategy. She describes how she studied people, their habits, their mistakes, their greed, and began sketching a life that would no longer depend on anyone's permission. The visuals grow sharper, more determined. Isabella writing plans in the margins of old notebooks, tucking away cash into envelopes hidden in dresser drawers, her reflection staring back from a bus window with resolve hardening in her eyes. She remembers the first time she said the words out loud, whispering to herself in a dim apartment. One day, I'll own something that no one can take away from me. That promise became her compass. This chapter also reveals her first small victories, the promotion at a diner after months of relentless work, the moment she walked out of a bank clutching the approval for her very first loan, the pride of signing a lease not for survival, but for her own business venture, however modest. Each success was a brick laid carefully on a foundation she was building alone. The chapter closes with her voice steadier, edged with a spark of anticipation. She admits that revenge was never the plan at first. It was survival. But as she built, as her name began to hold weight in contracts and accounts, she realized that every step forward was bringing her closer to something far greater than independence. It was bringing her closer to the day her family would no longer look down on her, but would have to look up. The final line strikes like a drumbeat. I wasn't just surviving. I was blueprinting revenge. Writing. Chapter 5 descends into the long, grueling stretch Isabella Graves calls the silent years. a period when the world seemed deaf to her efforts, when every step forward was followed by two steps back. She recalls nights of staring at balance sheets with red numbers glaring like open wounds, of pouring coffee into her veins just to stay awake through another 18-hour day. There were ventures that collapsed before they could stand, partnerships that dissolved when promises were broken, and moments so bleak that the idea of giving up whispered constantly in her ear. Yet Isabella never surrendered. Instead, she turned her silence into a shield, keeping her plans close, her struggles hidden, and her determination burning beneath the surface. The visuals are raw and unflinching. Isabella sitting alone in a dim apartment, papers scattered around her like battlefield debris. Late-night neon lights bleeding through blinds as she types furiously at a computer. Her hands calloused from work, gripping a pen as though it were a weapon. She remembers moments when her peers mocked her for trying to rise above her station, when her family's absence felt like proof that she was destined to fail. But each insult became a nail in the coffin of their expectations, pushing her further, driving her deeper into the grind. What made these years silent, she explains, was the absence of recognition. Success was still a distant dream, and no one was watching to applaud her effort. She lived in the shadows, forgotten by the world. But within those shadows, her identity was reshaping. Her narration grows reflective here, admitting that isolation broke her in some ways, but rebuilt her in others. It stripped her of illusions, of dependency, and left behind a woman who was no longer searching for approval, but forging her own authority. As the chapter nears its end, the tone shifts. After endless failures, one deal finally landed, a contract that turned whispers of doubt into murmurs of respect. That deal became the spark that lit the fire, proof that her years of invisible struggle were not wasted, but preparing her for something far larger. The chapter closes on her words, heavy yet defiant. For years, no one heard me, but the silence wasn't empty. It was the sound of me sharpening my edge. Chapter 6 marks the turning point where Isabella Graves transforms from a survivor into a force of authority. With the contract that finally broke her silence, she began to accumulate not just money, but leverage. She recalls the intoxicating rush of signing her first major property deal. The ink from her pen, a symbol of control she had never been granted in her childhood. Each acquisition was more than business. It was reclamation, a rewriting of the narrative that had once cast her as invisible. She poured herself into learning the mechanics of real estate, contracts, negotiations, and the subtle art of turning hesitation into advantage. For the first time, people who once overlooked her began addressing her with respect, their tones shifting when they realized she had the resources to outbid, outmaneuver, and outlast them. The visuals here are sweeping and cinematic. Isabella walking through unfinished buildings, the echo of her footsteps filling empty halls, wide shots of city skylines with her name quietly typed onto contracts in glowing overlays. Close-ups of her hand tightening around a pen before she signs another deed. She recalls the thrill of seeing her name appear on property records, a permanent mark in a world that had tried so hard to erase her existence. Each purchase was both an act of independence and a piece of quiet revenge, as if she were buying the future her family said she could never touch. As her influence grew, Isabella found herself drawn to symbolic choices. She didn't just buy spaces, she bought statements. Venues where people celebrated milestones, where families gathered, where love was meant to be honored. She admits, almost with a hint of a smile, that perhaps part of her was already thinking of her family's wedding plans when she signed the deed to a glittering event hall, a property her competitors had overlooked, but she recognized as invaluable. At the time, it was just another investment. Later, it would become destiny. The chapter closes on a note of foreshadowing, her voice low and deliberate. I bought more than walls and chandeliers. I bought my way back into their lives. Chapter 7 begins with a phone ringing, a simple, ordinary sound that would soon become the thread tying Isabella's quiet empire to the family that had abandoned her. She remembers the moment vividly. She was reviewing blueprints in her office, papers spread like puzzle pieces across her desk, when the call came through. On the other end was a frantic voice from the manager of one of her newest properties, the event hall she had bought almost on instinct. The manager explained that a high-profile family had booked the space for an upcoming wedding. But complications with permits meant the final approval required the owner's signature. Isabella listened silently, her pen hovering over the page. Then, with measured calm, she asked the name of the family. The pause before the answer felt like an eternity. When the surname slipped through the receiver, her surname, it hit her with the weight of a lifetime. The family that had mocked her, cast her out, and branded her as a burden was unknowingly preparing to celebrate their grandest occasion in a hall she now controlled. She recounts the rush of emotions, anger, disbelief, and almost dark amusement. Fate, it seemed, had handed her the stage she never thought she'd step on again. The scene cuts between Isabella's narration and the unfolding irony. Her relatives touring the hall, praising the chandeliers, the acoustics, the elegance of the space, all the while oblivious that the walls belonged to the sister they had discarded. Isabella listened silently, her pen hovering over the page. Then, with measured calm, she asked the name of the family. The pause before the answer felt like an eternity. When the surname slipped through the receiver, her surname, it hit her with the weight of a lifetime. The family that had mocked her, cast her out, and branded her as a burden was unknowingly preparing to celebrate their grandest occasion in a hall she now controlled. She recounts the rush of emotions, anger, disbelief, and almost dark amusement. Fate, it seemed, had handed her the stage she never thought she'd step on again. The scene cuts between Isabella's narration and the unfolding irony. Her relatives touring the hall, praising the chandeliers, the acoustics, the elegance of the space, all the while oblivious that the walls belonged to the sister they had discarded. Isabella listened silently, her pen hovering over the page. Then, with measured calm, she asked the name of the family. The pause before the answer felt like an eternity. When the surname slipped through the receiver, her surname, it hit her with the weight of a lifetime. The family that had mocked her, cast her out, and branded her as a burden was unknowingly preparing to celebrate their grandest occasion in a hall she now controlled. Chapter 8 opens with an envelope sliding through Isabella's mail slot, cream-colored and sealed with gold trim. She picks it up absent-mindedly, expecting another contract or partnership offer, but the weight of the paper feels different. As her eyes scan the scripted lettering, her breath stills. It's a wedding invitation from her own family. The very same relatives who had once excluded her from gatherings, dismissed her existence, and celebrated milestones without her now extended a hand, not out of love, but out of necessity. The irony slices deep. Isabella recalls holding the card delicately, as if it might dissolve between her fingers. The words were polished, the details extravagant, the tone dripping with prestige. Yet nowhere on the page was there true acknowledgement of her. It was addressed not to Isabella Graves, sister, daughter, family, but to Miss Graves, venue owner. That distinction told her everything. She was no longer the forgotten girl. She was a name that carried weight in contracts, a signature they couldn't proceed without. Isabella admits that for a moment, she considered ignoring it, throwing the envelope in the trash and walking away. But she couldn't. This wasn't merely an invitation to a wedding, it was an unspoken summons to a stage built for reckoning. Her silence, her years of absence, her unannounced success, all of it would find its voice the moment she stepped foot in that hall. The imagery sharpens as she sets the card down on her desk, the invitation illuminated by the faint glow of a desk lamp. She doesn't smile, she doesn't cry, she simply stares at it, her mind calculating, her heart steady. They wanted me absent when I had nothing, but now they need me present because I own everything, her voiceover declares. The chapter closes with Isabella slipping the invitation into her drawer, her decision unspoken yet inevitable. The stage was set, and for the first time in years, she would walk into a family gathering not as their burden, but as their judge. Chapter 9 unfolds with the sun rising over the grand estate where the wedding is set to take place. The camera lingers on the details. Florists arranging fresh roses, guests in fine attire stepping out of sleek cars, and the chatter of anticipation filling the air. Everything seems perfect until Isabella arrives, dressed in a sharp, understated gown that radiates authority rather than extravagance. She steps out of her black car, heels clicking against the pavement with deliberate rhythm. The silence that follows her entrance is deafening. Inside the venue, her family is already present. They laugh, pose for photos, and exchange warm greetings, unaware that the true orchestrator of this day has just walked through the door. Isabella pauses in the grand hallway, her gaze sweeping over the chandeliers she had chosen, the marble floors she had paid for, the staff who nod at her with quiet respect. Every corner of the venue bears her mark, though none of the guests know it yet. The narrator's voice hardens. They thought this hall was theirs. They thought I would remain a ghost at the edge of their story. But ghosts don't own kingdoms. I do. As she approaches the reception area, eyes begin to shift toward her. Whispers ripple among the guests. Some recognize her instantly, the estranged daughter, the one who had been left out, written off. Others see only a striking woman moving with absolute confidence, unaware of the storm building in her wake. The camera captures her family's first reaction in a slow-motion sequence, her mother's smile faltering, her father's jaw tightening, her siblings exchanging uneasy glances. The bride, resplendent in lace, narrows her eyes, half in shock, half in fury. Isabella takes her seat without permission, without apology. The chapter closes on a sharp beat. The master of ceremonies steps onto the stage to welcome the guests. But before he can begin, the venue manager leans into his ear, whispering something that makes his face pale. His eyes dart toward Isabella, seated calmly, a faint, knowing smirk playing at her lips. The cliffhanger line. That was the moment they realized the hall they celebrated in didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. The chapter opens with the atmosphere inside the venue shifting palpably. Conversations hush, glances dart toward Isabella, and tension crackles in the air like static. Her family gathers in the huddle near the stage, their elegant faces breaking into expressions of disbelief and unease. They had spent weeks preparing this flawless wedding, yet their carefully constructed world is unraveling at the seams, all because of her presence. Isabella rises slowly from her seat, her movements deliberate, commanding the attention of every eye in the hall. The bride's voice cuts across the silence first, trembling with indignation. "Why are you even here?" The mother stiffens, attempting to regain control, snapping, "This is not your place, Isabella." But her father's face tells the true story. He knows, deep down, that everything is about to be exposed. The visuals zoom in on Isabella's calm expression as she reaches into her clutch and pulls out a sleek leather folder. With one swift motion, she lays the ownership papers on the nearest table. The camera captures a close-up of the family crest embossed on the document, the signatures gleaming in bold ink. Gasps ripple across the room as the narrator's voice overlays the silence. I wasn't a guest. I was the host. This was my house, my hall, my stage, and they had forgotten whose name was carved into the foundation. B-roll intercuts with staff exchanging glances, servers whispering to one another, and guests pulling out phones recording every second of the unraveling drama. The bride clutches her gown as if the truth might stain it, while the father finally steps forward, his voice low but trembling. You own this place? Isabella doesn't flinch. She answers, not with rage, but with cool precision. No, I built it. You just borrowed it. The sound design drops into near silence, punctuated by the faint hum of chandeliers before swelling into a haunting string score. The cliffhanger lands with the weight of a gavel. The family's perfect illusion has shattered, and every guest now sees them not as the proud hosts of a wedding, but as squatters in Isabella's empire. Cliffhanger line. And in that moment, they understood. I wasn't just in their story anymore. I had rewritten it. The chapter opens with the heavy silence of disbelief. Guests stare, phones raised, recording the spectacle as if they know history is unfolding before them. Isabella stands tall in the center of the hall, her calm presence contrasted against her family's frantic whispers and paling faces. The murmurs grow louder, spiraling into a frenzy. Some guests gasp in admiration, others in shock, but all eyes remain locked on her. The master of ceremonies, visibly shaken, attempts to regain order, but his words falter as Isabella steps forward, her voice steady, slicing through the chaos. This day may be theirs to celebrate, but this place is mine. The words reverberate across the hall like a verdict. The camera pans across rows of guests, powerful businessmen, socialites, distant relatives, all suddenly realizing that the woman, once dismissed as an outcast, now stands as the orchestrator of their environment. Cutaways reveal servers nodding with pride, staff exchanging glances of vindication as though silently declaring they had known the truth all along. Her mother trembles, reaching for dignity in her words. Why would you humiliate us like this? Isabella's gaze hardens. I didn't humiliate you. You did that the day you erased me. I'm only holding up the mirror. The tension explodes as whispers become a chorus. Guests text furiously, social media feeds buzz with live posts, and the story spreads beyond the walls of the venue. The sound design layers subtle notification dings over swelling cinematic strings, signaling how fast Isabella's truth is becoming public. Then, a sharp beat. The venue manager steps onto the stage and, at Isabella's subtle nod, takes the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he announces, please welcome the rightful owner of this venue, Miss Isabella Graves. The spotlight shifts, illuminating her. Cameras flash, applause breaks in pockets, and her family stands frozen, their power dissolved in the light of exposure. Cliffhanger line, the wedding was no longer the headline of the night. I was. The chapter begins with the applause fading into a heavy, simmering tension. The spotlight still lingers on Isabella, but all eyes now shift toward her family. The bride's perfectly composed face twists into fury. Her bouquet trembles in her clenched hands. You think this is about you? She spits across the hall. You've ruined everything. The words echo, raw and venomous, shattering whatever fragile veneer of grace remained. The father storms forward, his voice booming. How dare you embarrass us like this in front of everyone? His hand slams against the table, rattling glasses and silverware. Close-up shots capture the shock on guests' faces, the nervous shifting of servers, the way whispers swell like an incoming tide. Isabella doesn't move. She stands her ground, her tone level and unshaken. Embarrass you? No. I'm showing them who you really are. Her calmness cuts sharper than any raised voice, exposing the family's desperation as their anger grows louder and messier. The mother steps in next, her voice cracking not with rage, but with fear. People are watching. Please stop. But it's too late. People aren't just watching, they're recording. Dozens of phones capture every word, every outburst, every humiliation. The sound design highlights the faint clicks of camera shutters and the soft buzz of live stream notifications spreading like wildfire. Then comes the breaking point. The bride, shaking with rage, hurls her bouquet across the floor, petals scattering like confetti twisted by anger. She screams, "You've destroyed my wedding!" A slow-motion shot shows the bouquet hitting the ground, the fragments of flowers mirroring the family's fractured facade. The camera closes on Isabella's expression, cool, almost sorrowful, as she delivers her line. "I didn't destroy it. You did. The moment you chose to erase me." The hall falls into stunned silence, the weight of her words pressing down harder than the chaos. Guests exchange looks, not at Isabella as the villain, but at their family as the ones unraveling in front of the world. Cliffhanger line. And as they broke apart, I realized something. I didn't need to fight them anymore. They were already burning themselves to the ground. The chapter opens with the chaos of the confrontation giving way to silence. The once celebratory hall now feels heavy, suffocating, as guests whisper and scatter in small clusters. The flowers look wilted under the harsh light, the music has stopped, and the scent of tension lingers thicker than the perfume in the air. Isabella watches as her family withdraws to a corner, their faces pale, their voices lowered but frantic. Narrator overlays the quiet. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. The truth had done the work for me. The visuals follow Isabella as she steps away from the spotlight and into the shadows of the grand hallway. She pauses near the tall windows, the city lights glowing in the distance. Her figure is reflected against the glass. No longer the forgotten daughter, but the silent architect of the night. In the background, guests debate whether to stay or leave, their chatter buzzing like flies around the decaying glamour of the event. Close-ups show her siblings arguing amongst themselves, the bride sobbing into her veil, the father pacing with clenched fists, and the mother burying her face in trembling hands. The image of a perfect family has dissolved, and the footage captures their unraveling with cinematic precision. B-roll suggestions: waitstaff clearing half-eaten plates, spilled champagne staining white linens, petals from the destroyed bouquet scattered across the floor. These quiet details symbolize the ruins of a celebration that collapsed under the weight of its own lies. The sound design shifts to low, suspenseful strings mixed with faint echoes of laughter from earlier in the evening, distorted now, haunting. Narrator line: they wanted me invisible, erased from their story. But in the end, I didn't have to lift a hand. The shadows I left them in revealed who they really were. The camera closes in on Isabella as she walks slowly down the hall, away from the noise, her heels clicking with quiet power. Guests turn their heads as she passes, not with pity, but with respect. The cliffhanger line: and yet, even as the night ended in ruins, I knew one last revelation still waited for them. The chapter opens with a sweeping shot of the ballroom, dimmed now to a murmur of shame. Guests have begun slipping away, whispering about the spectacle they've just witnessed, their footsteps echoing against marble floors. The family clings together near the head table, visibly shaken, their dignity in tatters. But Isabella hasn't left yet. She lingers, calm and poised, as though the night still belongs to her. Narration cuts in with measured weight. I had one last card to play. They thought they'd lost face tonight, but what they didn't realize was that I'd taken more than just their pride. The visuals tighten on Isabella as she retrieves a second folder from her clutch, thicker, heavier than the first. Guests who remain shift nervously as she lays it on the table, the sound of leather hitting wood sharp in the silence. Her father glares, his voice strained. What more could you possibly want? With a deliberate pause, Isabella opens the folder to reveal property deeds, contracts, and financial statements. The camera zooms in on signatures, her family's businesses, their summer house, and even the land they once mocked her for never inheriting, all signed over to her company through quiet acquisitions they had never seen coming. She looks directly at them, her words clear, unshaken. While you shut me out, I bought everything you thought you owned. Tonight, you didn't just marry into a new family. You married into my empire. The guests erupt in murmurs, phones lift again, and the last remnants of the family's illusion collapse. The bride gasps audibly, her veil trembling. The mother shakes her head in disbelief. The father sinks into his chair, his authority crumbling in plain sight. B-roll suggestions, flashing phones, close-ups of shocked faces, the soft flicker of candles burning lower as if marking the end of an era. The soundscape builds to a crescendo of strings and percussion before cutting suddenly to silence, as Isabella closes the folder with finality. Narrator line. They had erased me from their story, but I had written myself into every line they thought they controlled. The camera follows Isabella as she turns her back on them, walking slowly toward the exit. The light of the chandeliers frames her figure as the doors open wide before her. Cliffhanger. And as I left them sitting in the ruins of their own empire, I knew this was more than revenge. It was the beginning of my reign. The final chapter opens with dawn breaking over the city skyline. The chaos of the wedding night has faded, replaced by the stillness of morning. The visuals shift from the ruins of the reception, discarded flowers, toppled glasses, and an abandoned hall, to Isabella sitting alone in her office, sunlight spilling across her desk. The quiet is no longer heavy with loneliness, it's filled with strength. I didn't win because I humiliated them. I won because I found myself. B-roll transitions between Isabella signing new contracts, employees greeting her warmly, and candid shots of her walking through her company headquarters. Her once quiet footsteps are now echoed by teams who follow her lead, by a business empire that carries her name with pride. She is no longer the forgotten daughter, but a woman who rebuilt her life from rejection. Her voiceover admits vulnerability. For years, I craved their approval. I thought being part of their world would complete me. But when they cast me out, they unknowingly set me free. I didn't need a seat at their table because I built my own. The visuals grow more symbolic. Isabella closing the drawer that still holds the wedding invitation, then walking to the window, looking out at the city she now commands. A subtle smile plays across her face, not of revenge anymore, but of peace. Sound design, gentle piano layered with soft strings, a melody that feels both mournful and triumphant. Final narrator line, they called me useless, unwanted, invisible. But in the end, I didn't just prove them wrong. I proved to myself that I was never theirs to define. I was always mine. The closing shot fades to black with Isabella silhouette against the sunrise, her empire's skyline stretching into the distance. Cliffhanger for the audience's imagination. And as for my family, well, some stories end, but others simply fade away.